Hi everyone, I'm back again with another film review. It's been a little while and the reason is pretty obvious. If you've looked at the American box office and worldwide, the films which have been coming out just do not interest me that much. Like I haven't seen all these remakes of the Disney films and so I had to wait, and I'm in Australia, so the film I'm going to talk about today just opened, and that's Once Upon a Time, ... in Hollywood, the new Tarantino film. And depending on how you count, it's either his 9th or 10th film. The reason why that makes a big difference, Tarantino has said when he makes his 10th film, he's then going to retire. Well, whether that's true or not, I don't know. So we're going to do our usual thing. Should you see it in the theater? Should you see it at all? Then I'll do a little breakdown of the film itself, and then we'll talk in spoilers. And most of the talk will be in spoilers because I want to get into the film, but also because the film is dealing with real life events, I don't want to give anything away. So should you see this film in a cinema? I love this film, but it has had very mixed reviews. And so what I will say is, I do think you should see it in the cinema, and for this reason. If you're going to see it at all, see it in the cinema where you're locked down to the best viewing experience possible. Because I think if you saw it at home, it runs just under 3 hours. I think you would get distracted, you would get up, you'd take a break, and the film's flow would then be broken. So if you're in, see it in the cinema. If not, then maybe streaming later on and you can catch up with it. But I think it's really well worth seeing, and there's some beautiful filmmaking. Okay, I'm going to be back in a second and we'll talk about this film. Bye. Okay, so let's discuss Quentin Tarantino's latest film. This film pretty much encapsulates 3 days, late August, 1969 Los Angeles, and it leads up to the very famous murder of Sharon Tate by the family, which were the group of cultists who worshipped Charles Manson. So it's in some ways incredibly tight film and a buddy film pretty much, and yet it's commenting on a much larger picture by using that as its prism. So the film centers around really the friendship between Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his best friend. He's a stuntman, but he's more now a gopher, played by Brad Pitt, and he's Cliff Booth. Now, if you know anything about Hollywood, and you know Rick Dalton's career as it's defined in the film, where he's been on a show called Bounty Law, and now he plays bit parts on other shows, and he's got a best friend who's a stuntman. That pretty much is very close to Burt Reynolds' life, who had a best friend called Hal Needham, and they always were working together in Hollywood. So already Quentin Tarantino is kind of playing with reality, and in fact there's an episode in which they talk about where Rick Dalton has been in the show FBI, which is a real show, and Burt Reynolds was in that show, and it's very clever. They reenacted it. It's really interesting. Like, this film, for people who are interested in pop culture, especially filmmaking and that period of movies, it's just a treasure trove of memories. But of course, that's not enough. A lot of people can mine pop culture. Tarantino is using this to also comment, because 1969 and the murder of Sharon Tate is often seen as a tipping point. It was the death of the counterculture. And the reason why I say that is because after that happened, all the movement of free love and all that really tightened up as 1969 ended and they went into the 70s, and you had the Vietnam War and the protests against it, and then the shutting down of it, plus Watergate. What happened was the US turned into a much more cynical country, and a lot of people say once you had hippies murdering pregnant women, that movement was dead. And people just didn't take anything on face value ever again. So Quentin Tarantino has picked a very precise time to comment on. The film is just majestic. Like, I don't think I've ever seen. You could just there's a lot of driving scenes where they're just driving around LA, and it is so beautifully shot, and the actors are so charismatic. You could just watch it on loop. Like, I could just watch Brad Pitt drive around 1969 Los Angeles. The way he drives is magnificent as well, but it just looks great. You just want to be there. Everything's so sunny. This is by far Tarantino's most tender, might be the wrong word, but this is a really, like, he's normally defined by the way he uses hyper-violence to make a point. And in this film, although there is some incredible violence, it really is more about friendships and connections and the dreams that everyone has and how they're not always found. The cast beyond DiCaprio and Pitt is magnificent. In fact, I can't go through it all. It is ridiculous. Like, you'll have just one person come on for one scene and you'll go, oh my God. So you'll have Al Pacino's in there. Emil Hirsch plays Jay Sebring, who's best friends with Sharon Tate. You have pretty much one thing to notice is in the Manson cult, because there's one scene where you really do go out to the ranch, as it was known, and all those children, when I went through all the credits, they're nearly all the children of Hollywood people. That's no fluke. Tarantino is commenting on the family and how they were, people see them as an aberration, but this was all Hollywood as well. The film is just magnificent. I do want to call out Margaret Qualley. Now, Margaret Qualley, I kind of half recognized her. She plays Pussycat, which is kind of a known amalgamation of two of the family members. And she's played by Margaret Qualley, as I said, who's the daughter of Andy McDowell. And she just steals her scene. She is so gorgeous, but also so charismatic. And her and Brad Pitt are magnificent. So that's one scene to look out for. I will say that Charles Manson is played by Australian, Damon Herriman. And he's not in the film that much because it's really not about that. But the reason I wanted to call it out is if you're into TV, and one of the best shows on TV is Mindhunter on Netflix, and season 2 just started about 2 days ago. I'm still catching up on other TV. But Damon Herriman plays Charles Manson on that as well. And it's odd because when Herriman is interviewed about playing Charles Manson, he talks about all this research and stuff. And then when you see the film, he's not in it that often. And I think it's because he just is talking about playing that character for various shows. The one scene I do want to talk about before we get into spoilers is the controversial scene with Bruce Lee. Now, in it, Bruce Lee's family have said they don't like the way he was represented. And it's an interesting scene because for two things. One is people are saying the way that Bruce Lee portrays himself, his accent, and the way he really acts like a dick is, not respectful to him. Now, again, I can use my being an old guy he talked like that in everything. So that's kind of stupid. It's actually a really good impersonation. Also, Bruce Lee has the last laugh because in the scene he's kind of put down a little bit, but of course he becomes the greatest martial artist of all time, definitely in cinema. But what people seem to forget is that scene is occurring when Brad Pitt's character is having a memory. So it's quite obvious to me that it's a fantasy. I mean, he might have had some sort of interaction with Bruce Lee, but it's all from his point of view. And if you've probably seen some of it on TV, that scene, and it's just ridiculous. And I don't think it did play out that way. So I think people are kind of missing the point of that memory is very transmutable. Okay, that's it. Let's get back to spoilers. so we're in spoilers. So you shouldn't be watching this if you haven't seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Couple things I want to cover. First is, this film is essentially a Western fairy tale. Like, the two characters, DiCaprio and Pitt, are basically cowboys. They're the last of their generation. After 1969, you won't have those kind of guys. New Hollywood, represented by Sharon Tate, will come in and change everything, and you'll start to get the new generation of auteurs who come through, like Coppola, Scorsese, De Palma. These guys are all going to change. Polanski is representative of that, and they're just going to change that landscape. So it is a fairy tale, and like everything in a Western, vigilante rule, justice trumps the law, and we see that in the last scene. So there's one other scene I want to talk about before we get to the finale, and that is the most crucial scene in the whole film. And I don't think people are talking about it enough, and that is the boat scene. Now, the boat scene is very short, and it's in which you go back where people have been talking about Brad Pitt's character, Booth, and saying he's a wife killer. And it also says something about 1969 that people can just say, oh yeah, that guy, I don't like him so much because I think he killed his wife. They know he killed his wife. They're not sure whether it was an accident or not. And they still employ him, they still talk to him. So I don't know what that says. But this scene goes back to that event. And it is, Tarantino doesn't make mistakes. So he has shot this on purpose that you cannot be sure whether he killed his wife on purpose or if it was an accident. Because he's drunk, he's definitely reckless, but he's got a spear gun and he is aiming it towards her, and you don't see what happens, whether he on purpose intentionally shoots the spear, or does the boat rock, or does he slip, or whatever. So that's on purpose. Now, the other thing I will say is, it's been a long time rumor that something like that was what occurred when Natalie Wood was killed on a boat. So again, Tarantino. What I will say about that is, if you choose to believe he did it on purpose, the whole film changes. Because then he is a horrible person. He is disgusting. And it actually then is what men can get away with, that kind of man, a good-looking man. Or it was an accident, and actually his story is quite tragic, and he is a dependable person, and everything that is shown in the film seems to support that view. So I came down on the side of that he didn't do it. And I based that on the way that he interacts with Pussycat in the car, where she basically offers herself to him sexually, and he knocks it back because she's obviously underage. And also the way he looks out for George Spahn on the ranch. This is a man, in his bio, he's ex-Green Beret. He's basically portrayed as the most dangerous man in Hollywood kind of thing. And but he seems to be a stand-up guy. So, but you can be both sometimes. But it's really open to interpretation. But that's the prism. Depending on which side you go on, you'll view that character completely different, and then everything else which happens in the film. Now, I am one of the people who does not like Inglourious Bastards as much as everyone else. And the reason why I don't like it is I love the first 2/3 of the film. And I hate, so spoilers for Inglourious Bastards. I'm assuming anyone who's watched Once Upon a Time has watched all Tarantino's films. Although I've never seen Death Proof. It's my one, I've got a bit of a blind spot there. So I hate that in the end of it, he changes history and they kill Hitler. And I don't like it for two reasons. Why I sometimes struggle with that kind of magical realism where you change reality, but also it's kind of played so stupidly, I don't even like the tone of it. So this film does something similar. So as we lead up to the finale, instead of the family easily just going up to the Polanski's house, where Sharon Tate is, Jay Sebring, Claire Folger, and I think her husband, can't remember. And there's also, people never talk about, there was a young boy who just was sleeping over there and they kill him as well, but he doesn't seem to get mentioned. So what happens is they have a run-in with Rick Dalton, who does this incredibly regressive speech about how hippies are horrible. And this is where I think there might be a little bit of an element of Burt Reynolds, but also a little bit of Clint Eastwood, because Rick Dalton's career is reinvigorated because he goes to Italy and makes spaghetti westerns, which is exactly what Clint Eastwood did. And everything that Rick Dalton says to those Manson cultists is straight out of the Clint Eastwood box. Like, I mean, really talking up real America. So because of that speech, the cultists don't go into Sharon Tate's house, but they instead go into Rick Dalton's house. And unlucky for them is Brad Pitt playing Booth, who has seen action and just laughably is able to deal with three cultists. So the interesting aspect is, of course, he's just taken an acid cigarette. So he's on acid, the cultists are on acid, and so you're never quite sure what follows, because it's quite ridiculous in a lot of ways. Is it reality, or is everyone just tripping? Because even Rick Dalton, when he kills the girl, I think Susan Atkins, he thinks she's a zombie because she's come out, she's so insanely injured from what has happened in the house. So what is interesting is the amount of violence is really quite stomach churning. I mean, it's really bad. So is it true? And if it is true, does Booth even know what he's doing? It's hard to say. The interesting aspect is, of course, at the end of it, two things have happened. One is Booth is injured, and we see this beautiful, quite tender scene between Dalton and Booth in which they're talking about friendship before he goes, because they really know it's the end, because Dalton's already told him, I can't keep paying you and I can't employ you now that I've got married. And so it's a real, marker as to how their friendship will continue in the future. But B, what happens is the Tates don't get murdered. So Sharon Tate, I haven't even talked about Sharon Tate, played by Margot Robbie. I mean, she is ethereal in this film. I mean, she is so beautiful, so full of light. Which is what everyone says Sharon Tate was like, which is why Sharon Tate has always been portrayed as this victim. I mean, I haven't seen many of Sharon Tate's films at all, but this film allows her to live again. So Tarantino's positing that if that murder doesn't occur, is it that, as I spoke of earlier, the counterculture isn't slammed? Sharon Tate goes on to become a huge star. Polanski doesn't go mad. He doesn't end up, in France, because he can't come back to America because he raped a 13-year-old. Does everything change? And also in the film, Rick Dalton goes up to the house. And the implication is he'll be friends with the Tates and that his career will be reinvigorated because he might end up in a Polanski film. My God, there's just so much to talk about. Margot Robbie is fantastic, and we see her feet for a long time, with typical Tarantino foot fetish. There's some great acting in this film, especially Rick Dalton, where he interacts with this girl, and Timothy Olyphant when they're talking about how it is to act. But I'm going to finish off with the best scene. So the most important scene is the boat scene, but the best scene is when Brad Pitt goes up to the ranch to find out what is happening at George Spahn's ranch, which is a real place. The Manson cult really did live there. And he, the filmmaking is so majestic because Tarantino is playing with tone in that you are terrified. You really, because Booth isn't a real guy, he could get murdered there, we don't know, and yet it's still funny, and Pitt is so ridiculously charismatic and powerful in this scene that you go, could anyone take him out? It's just majestic. Overall, this film I think is great, and I actually do think, I've only seen it once, that if I see it again, it might actually go up in my estimation. Oh, I've gone on too long, but this film's just great. And I think anyone, the kind of people who probably watch my film reviews love film, and this is really one for film lovers. So that's it for today. If you like what I'm doing, hit like, comment. If you disagree, share anything that gets my stuff out. And I'm on Twitter at Guru Eden, and I'll talk to you soon.